So I'm going to tell you what exactly is nuclear power and why we should focus on it and help expand it. So why nuclear power as a fuel source or energy provider? Well, as far back as you want to look in human history, we've used fossil fuels. Now, fossil fuels are things such as coal, oil, and natural gas. We've used these to produce heat, light, electricity, and get us from point A to point B. Now, fossil fuels emit a thing called carbon emissions. Now, just briefly, carbon emissions are bad for us and the environment. So, over the past couple years or decades, we've wanted to switch to a more clean and reliable source of energy. Now, what are some examples? Well, for example, we live in Kansas. There's a lot of wind, so we could just place a bunch of turbines everywhere and have the wind propel the blades, turn a motor, create energy that way. But what happens if there's no wind at all? They just stand there looking pretty. But the sun is always out during the day. We can use that. We can use solar panels to harness the energy from that. But what if it's cloudy? What if it rains and there's nighttime? So the sun gets covered up and we can't collect energy from that. But a thing that is always moving and is always there is water. We could put a water wheel in a river, have the force of the water propel the wheel, create energy that way. But we can't put that in the middle of a field because there's no point. But what we could put there would be a nuclear reactor. Now I know I said a nuclear reactor, and your first thought is radiation. Now don't worry, I'm going to tell you why we shouldn't be scared of it. And to know why, we're going to go into a brief bit of history, how they work, radiation, and how we learn to harness radiation and use plants for good. All right, so what is nuclear power? Well, it is a form of energy that is produced from the heat generated by nuclear fission. We'll get into that here in a second. So, National Geographic states that nuclear energy was first discovered in the 1940s. In 1954, the first successful nuclear reactor was built in Russia. Then about 32 years later, in 1986, a reactor known as Chernobyl melted down. Now, there's a lot of things to this, but mostly it was the fact that they tried to make energy too quickly through nuclear fission. Now, what exactly is nuclear fission? Well, this picture isn't very good. Nuclear fission is, so the International Atomic Energy Agency states that nuclear power plants create energy through a process called nuclear fission. Now, what is nuclear fission? It's basically when we split an atom into two smaller parts. Now, that process takes place in here. So when the atom is split apart, heat is generated from it. So we put that in a vat or tub of water. So when the water is heated up through the reaction, steam creates up and then is pushed through a water turbine right here and thus creates the energy. Now, from this process, another thing can happen, radiation. Now, although nuclear power is interesting, it also comes with some serious problems or side effects, such as radiation and toxic waste. Now, I know they're scary and all, but hear me out. Bennett Almehu, a staff scientist with NRDC, states that leading science holds to the no linear threshold model for radiation protection. Now, what is this model? Well, it's right here. So this yellow line or off-colored line shows that without any of the modern protection we have developed today, even a small dose of radiation can give you a higher risk of getting cancer. Now, you may be wondering what this other line is. Well, that line is the safety measures we've put into place over the years. So as you can see, with a bit lower dosage or a certain amount of dosage, you basically don't have the risk of getting cancer. Now, what's an example of this? Well, X-ray machines. We've learned to harness radiation to use them in X-ray machines to figure out what's wrong with our bodies and such. But so this model assumes that even a small dose of radiation can still increase the chances of getting cancer or radiation though with the modern safety measures in place, you should be okay and should be fine. Now, though we've learned to harness radiation, what else does it do? Well, though there are some serious problems and side effects that can be caused through nuclear fission, it is a advantageous source of power. What do I mean by that? Well, according to an article by the Office of Nuclear Energy, nuclear power is the largest source of clean energy in America. Produces more energy than water, wind, and solar. It produces about 800 billion kilowatt hours per year. Well, that's a lot of electricity. So all this electricity must have a large carbon footprint. Well, not exactly. It produces about 470 million cubic tons of carbon. Now, that's equivalent to about 100 million cars on the road. Now, fossil fuels produce twice as much. So, using nuclear power plants, we can cut that by half. So, about removing probably 200 million cars off the road. Now, it doesn't only produce energy and lower carbon emissions, it also produces over 500,000 jobs to help the economy and help it grow. So, in conclusion, we've learned what exactly is nuclear fission, brief description of it, the consequences of using it too much, and then how we've learned to harness it and use it for better energy produce, less carbon emissions, and more jobs.